Your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on the same number, text 84850, and you can send a comment to LBC via Alexa. And we'd love you to watch us on Global Player or the new LBC app.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the number of people killed by a former pupil at a school in Austria has risen to 10. Police believe the suspected gunman was 21. He took his own life after the attack in the city of Graz this morning. Alina Lala, a reporter for the Austrian TV news channel Pulse 24, told LBC the motive isn't yet known.
He had a firearm license, so he owned the two guns legally. The motive hasn't been confirmed yet, but we do know that the perpetrator wasn't known by the police. He is from the region of Graz and he acted alone.
The UK is joining Australia, Canada and New Zealand in imposing sanctions on 2 Israeli ministers for inciting violence against Palestinians. Israel says it's outrageous its security and finance ministers are being hit with asset freezes and travel bans. LBC understands Rachel Reeves will extend the £3 bus fare cap for another year and a half in tomorrow's spending review. The Chancellor's expected to lay out plans to fund the scheme in full in England. Ministers previously only committed to it until the end of the year. And M&S has resumed some online orders after 46 days. The retailer's been struggling to recover from a cyber attack. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 20 points at 88.53. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather, a dry and mostly clear night for much of the UK, lows of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Cross Question on Tuesday. On our panel tonight, next to me on my left, we have Jo Grady, General Secretary of the University and College Union. Next to her is Alan Mack, Conservative Shadow Technology Secretary and MP for Havant. To my right, Liz Saville-Roberts, Plaid Cymru leader in Westminster. And to her right, Giles Dilnot, editor of the ConservativeHome website. They're here to take your calls, your questions, your texts. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on that number, and we'd love you to watch us on Global Player and the LBC app.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first call. It's all the way from Jerusalem, and Moshe is on the line. Moshe, what would you like to ask? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Hi. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. It's very interesting that they chose to sanction 2 ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Smotrich, as is got no popularity in Israel at all. And I'm just wondering why the UK bothered at all to sanction these 2 people. We're very happy that they're unable to travel abroad because they have no electoral pull at all in the country. Smotrich isn't even expected to be returned to the parliament next time. They're very loud-mouthed people, but they don't represent anybody in Israel. We're at a loss to understand what on God's earth they are. The woke pull in the UK is causing people to think that it's have any effect at all. Israel is a strong democracy, as you know, and we don't understand why 2 minority members of the parliament are being used as scapegoats to try and punish the whole country.
Well, I suppose the simple answer is they're 2 very senior government ministers, but Liz Saville-Roberts.
Exactly, they are indeed 2 very senior government ministers, and it's taken the government here in the UK a long time to get to this point. We know that this has been on David Lammy's desk for a number of months. It's finally come forward in a statement today. And the implication for the UK, of course, is the risk of the UK being implicated in war crimes. That is why it matters to what happens in Gaza, what happens in Palestine, the relationship of the United Kingdom government and by association the Parliament matters very much indeed as to what happens in Israel. The final part of this, of course, and the argument that was being put forward today, that this was necessary in order to have some hope, distant hope, for a two-state solution. But in all honesty, like many other countries of the world, the time has come for the UK government to recognise Palestine as a nation, because it is undeniable that there are terrible events happening there. And the UK government itself needs to watch out whether it will be implicated in war crimes in future.
Do you not think, though, that this was, and people said this in the last hour, we were talking about it on the programme, that it's to some extent performative? Because what the effect of it surely is that it's going to effectively cut off diplomatic relations between Britain and Israel. If we want to have some influence on getting the aid into Gaza on a two-state solution, surely we have to still be talking to Israel. And I doubt whether Netanyahu will want to talk to us now.
What influence have we had in relation to getting aid into Gaza? None whatsoever. There is a point when this has to be called out. And yes, there are other human rights atrocities happening in other places in the world, and we should be calling that out equally. But, and I respect Masha for saying we were talking about Israel as a democracy. If Israel wants to be considered a functioning democracy in the world, it needs to behave in a way that other functioning democracies, the rules by which functioning democracies abide by, in order to have the respect that goes with that. And that is why it is significant that we are calling out the Israeli government and these two ministers who are in that government.
OK, Alan Mack.
Well, Moshe's country suffered a huge atrocity on the 7th of October, and we shouldn't forget that. And I think we shouldn't forget the bigger picture in this, which, as Liz said, is that we do need to get the aid in, but we also need to get the remaining hostages out, and we need to get the peace process back on track. I haven't seen the comments from the Israeli ministers that led to these sanctions, but I think what's important in this very sensitive situation is to look at the big picture and to make sure that we are doing all that we can to help the peace process get back on track, get the hostages out, which is very important, and to get aid back in.
Do you support these sanctions?
Well, I haven't seen the comments from the Israeli ministers yet, so I don't think it's...
Where have you been? They've been all over the media for the last month or two.
No, I think that these are recent comments, I think, from the two ministers. I think...
well, they're an accumulation of comments from both of them.
Yeah, I haven't seen the latest ones. I think what's important for us as a country is to be standing with Israel, given they suffered a huge atrocity on the 7th of October, and actually to get back to the bigger picture, which is to make sure the peace process is back on track, and importantly, to get the hostages out.
But will putting sanctions on aid that process, as Liz says, or as I've just questioned, whether it will actually reduce our influence on the Israeli government, if we had any in the first place?
Well, I think it's a very sensitive situation. We are a friend of Israel. They're a democracy in the Middle East. They're a strong ally of the UK, and we need to make sure that we are using our diplomatic presence to make sure that the peace process gets back on track, and making sure that actually Hamas is eradicated from Gaza, where they cause so much suffering to working people and ordinary people.
But do you think that's possible, though, if we continue to ramp up the rhetoric from David Lammy a few weeks ago in the Commons? The Israelis took great exception to that. You now have this. I mean, who knows what's coming down the road? Does that mean that our influence in Israel is going to be diminished?
I don't think the rhetoric from David Lammy is always helpful. As you know, David Lammy's got a track record of saying some quite unsensible things in very sensitive situations. But I think on the bigger picture, the UK can be a positive force for good. Before the atrocity on the 7th of October, the peace process was moving forward. There was progress being made, and actually Hamas's role in all this has to be called to account as well.
Joe Grady.
I think these are a half measure. I think David Cameron was intending to implement these sanctions over a year ago. But I really have to agree with Liz. I think that we need to go much further in order to ensure, that the UK isn't complicit in war crimes, whilst we continue to allow exports to the Israeli government. We are. In terms of influence on Israel, I don't know if you saw, but yesterday evening, the former Prime Minister of Israel essentially said it is going to take Trump saying enough is enough. I don't think we need to worry about our own influence, which we've demonstrated we do not have sufficient influence to do anything there. So this is the right course of action. We need to do more. And, I think the global community, including the United States, needs to ensure that they are intervening here.
Do you think that might be possible in the future? Because a couple of weeks ago, I remember there were all sorts of newspaper reports that Trump was losing patience with Netanyahu, but that seems to have died away a bit.
I think it's really difficult to say with Donald Trump because he is so mercurial and so unpredictable. I mean, I did see today that he was referring to Greta as being kidnapped, which I think is appropriate given what happened. So maybe he is, but I think betting or predicting on Donald Trump is a fool's game.
I think we can all agree on that one.
Yeah.
Giles Dilnot.
The two people that we're talking about have not been particularly liked by our government for some time. And there's been comments over the last 2 years about how difficult they make things. But they're elected politicians in Israel, so they do have a constituency. They're not just speaking for nobody. Liz is wrong about our influence with Israel and opening borders to let aid in. I was there in the Foreign Office where we negotiated very, very hard.
But you used to work for James Cleverly when he was
Foreign Secretary. To get Rafah opened was a three-body problem. You had to get Hamas via Qatar, you had to get Egypt, and you had to get Israel, all in alignment to get aid in, and aid did go in. So we don't have no influence whatsoever on that. However, things have progressed, and at the moment, I think we're starting to see... There are people alive today in the UK thanks to our relationship with Israel. People who don't know they're alive today thanks to our relationship with Israel.
What do you mean by that?
That we have a very strong relationship with Israel, and there are things that we benefit from that mean that there are people alive today in the UK. The same is true with our relationship with... Well, yes, because it's not something I'm going to go into detail on, but there are people who are alive today in this country thanks to our relationship with Israel. We are not sending, by the way, things that kill people in Gaza. That is not what we export to Israel. So you can cut it off if you want to, that's fine, but there are not things, in the crudest possible terms, things that go bang that are being sent to Israel. That hasn't been true for a long time. There are things that they wanted from us that we wouldn't give them. And there are things that they asked for that they have been given because they had a right to defend themselves about an atrocious attack on the 7th of October. I was there on the 11th of October in Israel, and I witnessed a nation in trauma, and they still have... There are a lot of hostages still held in Gaza. We don't know if they're dead or alive, right? So they need to come back. The only bit where I think we have progressed is how far are the aims of Israel to remove a terrorist organization from being in charge of Gaza to where it is about Netanyahu's legacy. This happened on his watch, and there is an awful lot he wants to do to go, I have reclaimed the protector of Israel mandate because I have done what I have done. That's where we are starting to go, what is best for Israel and what is best for Benjamin Netanyahu? And I think there is a disquiet that those two things are starting to diverge. These things are over normally when the Americans say you've done enough, or Israel says we've done enough. That has not been the case since the 7th of October.
But there is, can I say something? Because I completely understand the point that you've made, but we have 50,000 people in Gaza who have been killed. That includes 17,000 children.
Yeah.
There are currently 2 million people being starved in Gaza. And if the, and I referenced the former Israeli Prime Minister earlier, he went as far as saying Netanyahu has failed Israel, he's failed to get back the hostages, and he is now punishing the Palestinians and engaging in war crimes. So who is going to intervene? You know what I mean? When I'm saying Trump has to step in and say enough is enough, like the Israeli hostages are not being helped by this situation.
The only people who will stop it are either the Israeli government or America by going, that's enough.
So for us, sanctions are the right thing to do.
Israel isn't even listening to its public and to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, forgive me, Giles, you've contradicted your argument earlier that the UK had an influence here.
It did, I saw it.
If for many of us who are, I have never been to Israel, I've never been to Palestine, but I'm an elected representative here, and it is my duty to represent my party and many of my constituents as well. What we see here, to come back to what is celebrated, Israel being celebrated as a democracy, is this just scorning of international rules and regulations, the rule-based order, which anybody who thinks about it knows that's not just a matter that protects Palestinian children, although heaven knows they need protecting. That protects us all. And this just assumption that it's either Israel, it's either Netanyahu's gift, or it's either Donald Trump's gift. We are moving into a very dangerous authoritarian
just say that's
world.
the reality.
And that's what our job is to call out, alongside not tolerating...
Who's been prosecuted in Israel for war crimes?
That will come down the road towards us, and we're all
hopefully.
And if it doesn't,
hopefully. Why hopefully?
Because there's been war crimes, and when there's a crime, someone should be prosecuted.
Have you got the evidence?
I believe the International Court of Justice are pretty clear that there is a probable genocide, and I think all you have to do is look at the news. We are witnessing it in live stream.
How many Palestinians are currently in Jordan? How many Palestinians are currently in Lebanon?
Well, we know there's 2 million starving in Gaza.
Currently in the West Bank.
Giles, your question is
way
fair
more.
enough.
Is that a genocide?
Wow.
Giles, your question is fair enough, but it is our duty as Parliament...
It's down to
hang on,
lawyers.
if you all speak
Lawyers
over each
decide
other, no one
whether a
can hear.
genocide has taken place, not politicians.
Liz.
Right. Giles, your question is fair enough about whether this will be a matter for International Criminal Court. Our duty here is to make sure that the space is there to ask the question and get the evidence.
Yeah, and I would support
for justice
that.
to be done.
Because if cases are brought, I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm not going to defend them out of... but at the moment, they haven't. I'm asking... We say there's a genocide happening. We say there's war crimes happening. At the moment, where have people come out and said that's... Where have they taken the case yet?
Well, we'll leave that question hanging because we need to go to a break and move on to other subjects. Thank you all very much indeed. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Weather.org. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
18 minutes past 8. Conservative MP Alan Mack is here. Plaid Cymru MP Liz Saville-Roberts. Giles Dilnot, editor of ConservativeHome. And way back when, a BBC political journalist.
Was one.
Halcyon days, Giles.
I know.
Halcyon days.
Where we used to make films together.
We did. And Joe Grady, General Secretary of the University and College Union. Right, let's go to a text question from Ollie in Hazelmere. With police forces set to see their budgets cut in tomorrow's spending review, have Labour had any success at all when it comes to the economy? Well, sadly, we don't have a Labour representative on tonight. So, Joe, you're the nearest we've got, I think.
Am I?
Well, you're kind of that direction, aren't you? Do you well, you've heard the question. Do you think they've had any success in the economy?
Look, for us, speaking from an education point of view, we are really worried about the spending review. We've got 10,000 jobs in higher education that are up for the chop. We've got 1 and 2 universities in crisis. We've got our colleges in a similar situation. They've cut adult spending, and yet a lot of their economic plan relies on the education sector delivering. So there's a gaping hole. And in terms of the economy, for every pound that's spent in higher education, you get 14 back in a local economy. It contributes 265 billion to the UK, and yet it's in a free fall crisis at the minute, and the Treasury are giving us nothing. You know, we're talking about a new nuclear power plant, and put aside how you feel about nuclear power, they're not investing anywhere near enough in further education that's going to help and train people that will be involved. So we are really worried about the things that we are not seeing in the spending review.
But I was reading that education is going to get another $4 billion.
I mean, my understanding is if education budgets aren't protected, there will be a 3% hit. So there may be more, but it's not keeping up and it's certainly not closing the gap. And in terms of higher education, I've just listed you what's happening. Like, there's nowhere near enough to stop this crisis. So we're not going to have the experts to deliver either the training that we need or to educate a workforce. We had Keir Starmer making that terrible speech about an island of strangers. Well, if you actually want to have an adult education that equips people with the skills that they need, you're not investing in it. You've just cut the adult education budget by 6%. So, yeah, we are incredibly worried at UCU.
Alan Mack.
Well, I think Joe's right to be worried about the spending review tomorrow. I think the problem is it's going to lock in Labour's approach to the economy, which is high tax, high spending, high borrowing, low growth. I think all your listeners and viewers will know that living standards are falling because inflation has gone up. The economy watchdog, the OBR, has halved the growth forecast for this year. And, of course, pensioners have just had their winter fuel payment removed.
They've just had it restored.
Well, they've had it restored, but after it was removed. So at every turn, we see the Labour government making a big mess of the economy, high taxes, high spending. They're thinking now of removing the 2-child cap on welfare, which would mean that working people have to pay for unlimited benefits for those out of work and their children. So at every turn, the Labour government has real mess of the economy, and actually Joe and others in other sectors. Of course, your government was
so successful in the economy, wasn't it?
We left the government with the fastest growing economy in the G7. Wages were rising.
And it still is 0.7% in the last quarter.
Well, the OBR has downgraded the growth forecast for this year. Inflation is up. People are feeling the pinch in their pockets. Sectors like Joe's are feeling the pinch. I mean, I was up in Scotland the other week where Dundee University is in really economic trouble. They cancelled the national supercomputer at Edinburgh University, which means long-term investment in things like science and technology, which is my brief, are under threat as well. So at every turn, Labour is really putting the country under a lot of pressure, and that hits people in the pocket.
Liz.
There are some of the capital investments which I think will be emphasised tomorrow, particularly in relation to nuclear, because that matters very much to North West Wales, that I do welcome. But they are flashy capital investments, and at the same time, particularly as looking, forgive me, I'm a Plaid Cymru MP, I'm going to talk about Wales, the national insurance hit for particularly the public sector, that's being 100% reinstated in England. It's only 85% and only for this year in Wales. So that's having a direct hit. Also, the impact on welfare changes, that particularly hits people in Wales because we have a higher demographic of people who are disabled, who are ill. And the question, of course...
Why is that?
Because we are a post-industrial, poorer community with an older population. That's the reality of what Wales is, and we don't get funded to reflect our needs in the sense of the people, the people's actual needs. And although the Tories will always argue that these are people, this impacts tax-paying other individuals, these are people who live in communities and they spend money in their communities. So if they have less money in their pocket, that has a knock-on effect into those communities as well. And I think that the great frustration that people are feeling with Labour after the general election last year, when, of course, it was an agenda of change, that was a message of change. But what has changed? Rachel Reeves is tied by her own ideologies.
And give him a chance.
Attlee knew he only had one chance after the Second World War, and he knew that he needed to change society. And they were brave, and they took that on, and they made the real changes. I'm sure your book about Thatcher will talk about exactly the same things.
Oh, we can spend the rest of the programme talking about
the real changes. This government, sadly, seems more intent on carrying on the status quo, hoping against hope that they'll have a second term. That's not what a government should be there to do. Labour or any colour.
I think you make a really good point on that, because do you remember Tony Blair has said that one of his biggest regrets is that he was so sort of conservative with the small c in his first term that he didn't really do anything. I mean, he did make changes, but there was nothing radical in the first term. And you can see Keir Starmer kind of going down that road as well in some ways, can't you?
Yes, exactly. There seems to be a fear of going against what has now become accepted as the economic, ideological orthodoxy, which does come back to Thatcher again.
You're sounding like Liz Truss talking about the Treasury orthodoxy.
But I would, in your interpretation of Thatcher, I'm very interested in Skidelsky's interpretation of Maynard Keynes, and I think that is somebody who we should be revisiting now as well.
Giles.
Just by the by, I agree with Joe, actually. Our university sector is world class, and its soft power influence is incredible.
Was it 3 in the top 10 of the world universities? We've got 3 of them.
It's 4, isn't it? Actually?
Is it, higher.
I think it's 4, yeah. It's 4. Yeah.
When I went to the Caribbean, the number of foreign ministers who had studied in the UK, it's extraordinary. And it does matter. People might not think it does, but it does. Liz is right about the status quo. We're all living in a bit of a fantasy land. I'm quite pleased to see Kemi and Mel Stride saying we need to be honest with people. We're all living in a fantasy and have done for quite some time. The public's expectation of what the government should pay for and can pay for long ago outstripped its ability to do so. We need to be honest with people and say, this is what we can do, this is what is possible, and be honest about that which cannot be done. And if you don't, what you do is a spread bet of things that you're all going to try, and all of them are mediocre. And you need to do a few things a lot better and be honest about the things that people can't have because the government cannot and has not for some time been able to.
But going back to Ollie's question, I mean, can any of you, I mean, none of you are Labour politicians, but can any of you name a single success that Labour have had in their first 11 months?
Well, immediately I can say no, not one, because they've taken a huge amount of pain on the winter fuel allowance. They probably should have stuck to, because now all the mice will come nibbling for saying, well, if you can row back on that, you can row back on other things. Never mind this fantasy 22 billion black hole, which, by the way, the OBR only recognises 9 billion, if that. It's now 1.25 billion she's got to find, plus the Chagos deal. That is ridiculous.
Okay, well,
you can only do that if you're going to borrow more or you're going to tax more.
Can you think of a success? That'd be a no then.
That's a no.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe.
I think they've done the right thing, U-turning on the issues that they have, but they've taken so much political pain because they made the wrong call. And I really think that what they need to do now is very much in the mould of what Liz said, be more bold and be more radical, because at the minute they're kind of dancing around reform and trying to kind of outright them, and they're losing any kind of grasp of to what people, I think, actually want them to do.
Right, Alan, if you were a Labour MP sitting here answering this question, how would you answer it?
Well, Labour MPs have been supporting the trade unions who wanted more money for public sector workers without any improvements in service levels for patients or productivity improvements. And they've succeeded. They've managed to squeeze £9 billion out of Rachel Reeves. They've rebelled on lots of things and squeezed more money out of Rachel Reeves for no productivity. And actually, as Giles rightly said, the economic policy of Labour has been a disaster from start to finish. 30 billion quid for the Chagos Islands, and we've given away territory and paid for the privilege. GB Energy, they spent £8 billion on that, it's not to produce any energy. They've imposed £25 billion worth of national insurance cuts. In national insurance rises on business, which, as Liz mentioned, has hit SMEs in particular. So it's been a really disastrous economic policy from Labour in the first 11 months.
So are you going to really leave it to me to give you some Labour achievements?
Go on.
I will, actually. I think, apart from the Chagos deal, I think they've done quite well on, and maybe apart from Israeli sanctions, but I think they've done quite well on foreign policy. I think they've got trade deals. Keir Starmer has developed a relationship with Trump, which I think is to our advantage.
To get it from 50% back to 25%, which wasn't there before.
Yes, but you're dealing with Trump. We have done better than any other European, certainly than the EU, in terms of reducing the tariffs. So I think that is something they can legitimately say is an achievement.
Can I say something on the public sector pay deals? Because I think they are an achievement, and I think your characterisation of them was really reprehensible, actually. To pay public servants what they are worth for the very demanding jobs that they do, particularly NHS workers, when their pay was allowed to stagnate and be degraded in the way that the previous Conservative governments for 14 years had done, is not bending to the unions. And I think it's a real disservice to the teachers, to the doctors and to the various workers that got those pay rises.
Well, I don't agree with that. Under the last Conservative government, we increased NHS funding to absolutely record levels. The problem that I've got is when you have Labour MPs putting pressure on Rachel Reeves, who then raises taxes on working people to pay the trade union bounds, and in return we get no improvement in patient service levels or in productivity, or train drivers squeezing squeezing out more money from the Labour government at the same time as services going down. So what I have a problem with is when we raise taxes on working people to pay trade union barons and we get no productivity in return.
You're not paying the trade union barons. I mean, they're not trousering the money, are they?
Train drivers, doctors, nurses, they are working people. They pay their taxes, but they've had their wages under your government cut so much that Labour had to put their hands in their pockets to even make sure that we had nurses using food banks. This isn't like some sort of union cabal squeezing money out of the government.
But Alan's got a point, hasn't he? If you give higher than inflation pay rises, which are the junior doctor, resident doctors we now call them, they got 22%. Without any real negotiation at all, it seemed to me. And now they're coming back for another 29%, and they're going to expect to get it because they got it last time.
Whether they'll get 29% we all know how negotiation works. The point is that there is a huge gap, and this is for many working people, whether they are unionised or not, in what the value of their wages before the Tories and the value of their wages now. Now, what we have is some workers effectively being able to unionise and work together to get better pay increases. What we have in the UK is a low-wage economy. We have loads of people who, and I've mentioned nurses as some of them, who are receiving benefits despite the fact that they are in work. You said that there hasn't been any extra productivity despite these extra pay. Why should there be? People are working, they're working week. Many people who work in the NHS are at burnout levels. People shouldn't be expected to work more just because they're getting a pay increase to address the loss in their wages.
We do need to call this to a close here. We've got half an hour for more of your questions. 0345 6060 973. Let's get the news headlines. It's 8:31. Here's Daryl Jackson.
The number of people killed by a former pupil at a school in Austria has risen to 10, with an adult dying in hospital. Police believe the suspected gunman was 21 and a former pupil. The Foreign Secretary has accused 2 Israeli government ministers of inciting violence as he announced sanctions. Israel says the measures are outrageous. And LBC understands that Chancellor Rachel Reeves will extend the £3 bus fare cap for another year and a half in tomorrow's spending review. Ministers previously only committed to it until the end of the year. LBC weather, a dry and mostly clear night for much of the UK. Patchy rain around the Western Isles tonight and a low of 3 degrees.
LBC.
Summer.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:33 on LBC. We have Joe Grady, General Secretary of the University and College Union, which I reckon you have a pretty tough job.
It's very difficult. We have, post-16 education that has been chronically underfunded under the last government, and, this government have not chosen to prioritise that sector either. And we have crisis in higher education. We've got underfunding in adult and further education. So
how much of it is to blame for the fall in the number of foreign students coming in?
So we do have a crisis at the moment, which has been a significant under-recruitment in international students. That has been, to no small degree, to do with the way in which this government and the last government have changed the rules around immigration. That is accounting for quite a bit of it. But there is a longer-term crisis in the funding for higher education is not stable. So you have peaks and troughs, or a boom and a bust, if you will. and the...
But the tuition fees, I mean, they've been quite stable for a long time and have only gone up marginally in the last year. So why... It's difficult to understand why there is such a crisis.
So give me a minute, because it's a bit of a story.
30 seconds.
So essentially what we have is, there used to be student number caps, whereas now any institution can recruit as many students as they can get through the door.
Yeah.
So your income is dependent on how many you can recruit. And some institutions will really competitively over-recruit to the detriment of potentially like a neighbour university. So that's a really big problem, and many universities have sought to over-recruit international students to plug those gaps. So as soon as you get an under-recruitment, the crisis is quite intense.
OK. Alan Mack is here. He's Conservative Shadow Technology Secretary and MP for Havant. Giles Dilnot is editor of ConservativeHome. And Liz Saville-Roberts, Plaid Cymru leader in Westminster and MP for Dwyfor Meirionnydd. And Liz, do you remember this?
Is there any belief he holds which survives a week in Downing Street?
Yes, the belief that she talks rubbish. Mr. Speaker.
What was going through your mind when he said that? Because you must have been quite shocked.
It wasn't a very good riposte, was it? Almost you feel a bit sorry for somebody who's embarrassed themselves in public. To give him his credit, I've got to give credit. Come the next Tuesday, there was a statement in the House, and he did apologise to me on the floor of the chamber. So as I've been saying, really, I've been pretty obnoxious since then, because the Prime Minister has apologised to me.
Did he not bring you up personally, though, and say, sorry, I went over the top there, I shouldn't have said that?
He apologised. He made a mistake at the time, which is surprising coming from a Prime Minister. It doesn't exactly have the ring of high oratory about it and high political
Alan, were you in the
words.
chamber at the time?
I was in the chamber at the time, and I think even by Keir Starmer's quite low standards, it was pretty embarrassing and quite rude to Liz. I think, he really should have had a much more substantive answer to Liz's question. And I think the whole House sort of just collectively groaned and was embarrassed.
As I understand it, you're quite popular in the House of Commons.
I don't know.
That's my impression. And OK, you do it to an MP that you know that everybody doesn't like, fine, but and it's probably a mistake to do it to a female MP as well.
Yeah, I think what was interesting too is it was a question that was really in the air that week about Keir Starmer flip-flopping on his values.
It was a valid question. It was a valid question.
Yeah, it was a question that he should have expected. It probably wasn't going to come from his own party. It probably wasn't going to come from the other opposition parties. But as an opposition party leader, it was a fair question to ask. And it hit home, didn't it?
Well, it certainly did. Right, let's go to another question which may hit home. It's from Raj in Clapham. It says, are the panel terrified of reform wiping their preferred political parties off the electoral map? If not, why not? Well, the TV presenter Dr. David Bull was announced as Reform's new party chairman this morning. The Liberal Democrats claim he's part of a conveyor belt of Trump sycophants appointed by Nigel Farage. Giles Dilnot.
With Reform, they are doing well in the polls. They are. It would be crazy to dismiss them. I think it would be strategically silly to dismiss them. They've gone out of the blocks with an election that's 4 years, might be 3 years, whatever, away, very, very fast. That momentum is hard to maintain. I don't actually think the Tories should be trying to ape or worry about. Nigel Farage declared very early on, which I thought was a mistake, he's going, my mission is to destroy the Tory party. He feels like he's already settled our hash and is now trying to target Labour. Maybe we should just let him get on with doing what he's doing. I think when he came out on the two-child benefit cap, I think that gives us an area where we can go, they're still trying to do spending. Look, they're being successful. They are about vibe. They are answering a question of going, well, two parties don't seem to have solved the big solutions of the problem. Fine. But I still think there's a bit of tortoise and hare going on here. They're richly out of the blocks. They're doing their thing. Let them do it and carry on. doing what you're doing, which is the Conservative Party, which is thinking about actually how do you solve some pretty fundamental questions. They're not about do we do the same thing but differently. They're about how do you actually solve some very fundamental positions, because the system doesn't work very well. It hasn't worked for a while. It's going to need to be a bit radical, and literally coming out with something off the back of a fag packet isn't going to work. Now, does that mean that we get relegated to irrelevance? I remember loads of parties, you will remember this, at certain times in their lives where they have been told you're irrelevant. Irrelevant is not a permanent desert. It doesn't happen. People do come back out of it and go, here's our offer. Now, if people turn around and go, sorry, still unhappy with you, still cross with you, understand that's a lot to do with the Tories. They have a lot to take on board to say why that happened. I just don't think they're permanently in the desert.
Liz Saville-Roberts, Reform are apparently going to wipe the board in Wales next year.
Well, there was a poll fairly recently, and it was the most recent poll in Wales, YouGov and ITV Wales. It put Plaid at 30% and Reform at 25% and Labour at 18%.
So a Plaid Reform coalition then?
I find that extremely unlikely, not least because my leader has already, Rena Bjornrath, has already said that that's not going to happen. But I think you were talking about, you mentioned the phrase Trump sycophant in relation to David Bull. And I think many people who particularly saw the interview between Zelensky and Trump and associate Farage with that, and it doesn't do.
Well, Farage did criticise Trump over that, to be fair.
He has, but that's not what has stuck in the public mind.
But when you're going door knocking in your constituency, you must encounter quite a few people who intend to support reform. And do they tell you why they're doing that?
Well, people still are looking for change, and they like politicians who speak in a very plain way. And Nigel Farage has an awful lot of attention on the media. I mean, you'd almost think that the media are looking to get Farage in power in Scotland and Wales because that's the next set of elections. And the coverage that they are having on the media is
big
way
story,
more.
wouldn't it?
It's extraordinary amount. But I mean, what he's talking about, what Farage is talking about in Wales, he was there this week. He's talking about reopening coal mines. Now, those communities know that that's not going to happen. It's almost as like he's ticking a series of cliché boxes, stereotypes about Wales. I'll mention coal mines. What we need is to clear up the effect of the coal mines. We need to find something else for those communities. He talks about reopening a blast furnace in Port Talbot. You can't restart a blast furnace that
you can, but
cold.
it's very difficult.
Well, the time that it has gone, and also may not even be there anymore. Again, he's saying things that as soon as he's questioned, I think that was a long-term vibe also, he was talking about Port Talbot. As soon as he's put under any pressure, people who know these communities realise that this is just saying something that looked good on the back of a fag packet. But if you're actually going to put that into effect as a policy, people just see through it.
OK. Joe Grady.
So I agree. I mean, I think Reform are opportunists, quite pure and simple. I think that people in general are sick of the mainstream parties. I think they want change. I think they feel pretty betrayed. But Reform offer nothing. And I think, people are willing to kind of toss a coin and see if it'll make things better. But they've got no policies on the NHS that are actually meaningful in terms of what will you do. I don't see how they're going to increase wages for workers. I don't see how they're going to address most of the issues that we face. What they are doing is sowing division in working class communities whilst billionaires continue their lifestyle. So they're selling a myth that by finger pointing and scapegoating will solve the problems of the country.
On the assumption that, the question was about your preferred political parties. I'm just going to assume that Labour is your preferred political party, traditionally. How much of a threat, because it seems to me, and I think Giles was effectively more than hinting at this, that they are now going after Labour voters. They think they've got as many Conservatives as they're going to get, maybe. How much of a threat are they to Labour, do you think?
I think they're a massive threat, and Labour need to go all in on them. They cannot let reform, recover from some of the
speeches about islands.
Yeah, I mean, I think Keir Starmer is wrong on this. I think the Labour Party are mortally wrong on this. What will improve lives for working people is not targeting migrants. It isn't migrants that are underfunding schools. It wasn't migrants that put your rent up. It wasn't migrants that put your bills up. It isn't migrants that have trashed the economy. It was your lot that did that, actually. It isn't migrants that have done any of those things.
She just pointed to Alan, by the way, for those who are listening rather than watching.
But we are seeing finger pointing at migrants from reform, and we are not seeing Keir Starmer actually do anything about that. If Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister now, Labour can have any story published that they want. They can be much more generous in their storytelling to the public. And Keir Starmer chose to call the UK a nation of strangers. He should be leading the UK. And if what we are saying is that people that move to this country need to learn the language and need to kind of assimilate, well, then we need to be funding adult education and further education. We need to be actually doing different things, not finger pointing. And I don't think we're going to improve people's lives. And Labour are risking handing this to reform.
Well, the more people see of reform, the more they realise it's not a serious force. If other panellists have said, look, when you actually put their policies under examination, people actually think, actually, this is not really for me. So let's just take another one of the things that Nigel Farage said recently, which is he wants to increase the personal allowance to £20,000. So everyone earning below £20,000, take them out of tax completely. But the reality that costs £50 to £80 billion. No information about how he'd pay for that. That's an economic policy as reckless as Rachel Reeves' policy.
But the question is, how is he going to, and reform going to affect your political party?
I think we should never be complacent about reform, and I think one of the things that we need to be alive to is that they are a channel for a lot of people's anger and frustration. So if you're a pensioner and you've had your winter fuel payment removed by Labour, you're going to be angry. Our job is to hold them to account. So we are not complacent about reform. Our job is to beat reform, not to be reform. And actually what we have to do is to offer a compelling set of policies. We need to win back those Conservative voters that have gone over to reform, and that work has already begun under Kemi Badenoch.
OK, it's 8:46. More questions in a moment.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Joe Grady, Giles Dilnot, Alan Mack and Liz Saville-Roberts here with me taking your calls. Here's one from Dima in Rochester. Hi, Dima.
Hi. Good evening.
What would you like to ask?
I'd like to say I'm a Muslim woman and I support the burqa ban, but I have not heard anyone voice that opinion in Parliament or in the media or in the public debate. So why is this voice not being heard?
How do you answer your own question?
I think the problem with it is that our political representation of Muslims in this country all belong to one shade and one political thought, when in fact When I travel between Muslim communities, I see such a diversity of opinions and viewpoints. I mean, I meet liberals, atheists, reform supporters among Muslims. But when you look at the political representation of Muslims, they act as if the Muslim community in this country is a monolith. No community is really a monolith. And if I could convey to you the picture within the Muslim community, a lot of people, I put it in the million, support the burqa ban because they think, if some women are being forced to wear the burqa, then it gives the liberty for their men to force them. And secondly, if women are not being forced to wear it, then it's just creating that barrier, preventing it from cultural integration to the country, from participating in public life, from having English friends. So I think I'm coming to see that it's the correct policy to ban it and to force that discussion within the Muslim community.
All right, Dima, thank you very much. Alan Mack.
Well, I think Kerry Badenoch has got the balance right on this. So she said that in the workplace, for example, employers should be decide. But actually, the bigger question is about integration and the wider sort of assimilation of Muslim women into British society and indeed other minorities in British society. So I don't think we should get too focused about the burqa, although it's an important question. I think the employer setting the rules is the right approach, but actually we need to have a bigger question around integration of minorities, particularly, for example, Kemi's been doing a lot of work on the rape gangs issue. The truth is most of those perpetrators are of Pakistani Muslim heritage. We shouldn't be afraid to call that out, for example. So I think there's a wider question here around integration more broadly.
Joe.
My point of view on this is that across many religions, women can wear headdresses. You know, we see that not just in Islam. And I would support a woman's right to choose to wear a burqa or not wear a burqa. I think the specifics around this is, you know, I was on Sophie Ridge last week with Sarah Pochin, and I thought some of her comments on that show were quite inflammatory and unhinged. And I think that the way in which a debate around whether or not women choose to adhere to a particular type of dress that's part of their religion is really being inflamed in a way that is not helpful and not productive.
I remember the first time this was brought up, I think it was by Jack Straw in about 2002, 2003, and he said, bear in mind he was MP for Blackburn, a constituency with a high Muslim population, he said he would not have people in his surgery whose face he could not see. And he got into, and that was a fairly controversial comment to make at the time, and Kemi Badenoch has sort of repeated that, I think, over the last few days. Should that be controversial?
I think it's pretty controversial, yeah. I think it's incredibly short-sighted. I personally have respect for people who a particular part of their religion is that they choose to cover their hair or their face. You know, we demonstrated during COVID that we were perfectly able to converse with people with parts of their face covered. What is people's particular problem, obsession with a burqa? I think there is far more to it than simply not enjoying not being able to scrutinise every corner of somebody's face.
Liz?
What you're seeing once again is the politicisation of what women choose to wear.
Well, Dima is a Muslim woman, and she says lots of Muslim women don't choose to wear it.
And she's entirely entitled to make her own decisions about what she wants to wear.
But what about those Muslim women whose husbands force them to wear it?
That, again, within society, women are forced to wear and do things by their husbands across a whole range of ethnicities and religions. It isn't just one particular religion. I mean, we all know that this actually is talking about a particularly directed question towards Muslims and particularly directed towards Muslim women. Just take this step back. This is about if women choose to wear something and it is their freedom and they are doing that within freedom to choose to wear it, then that is their choice. It really, it isn't to be choosing to turn on people, to turn on women because of their choice of clothing. It's a very, very old trope to try and control people.
Okay, Giles?
I think Dima's exactly right about the idea that the entire Muslim community of Great Britain is one homogenous mass. It's absolutely not true. By the way, the Democrats made a terrible mistake in America by assuming that certain groups, particularly Latinos, were all one homogenous political mass. I do question whether or not every woman who wears a burqa is making that choice herself. I don't like government bans, but I also remember I was going to raise it. You got there first. We've been around a long time. Jack Straw saying that he would not sit down with a constituent that wouldn't show their face. I think that's perfectly acceptable, and you shouldn't have a complaint about that. Also, just remember, people who wear niqab or wear headdress. I think a lot of people who want a burqa ban mean any kind of covering of the hair or burqa is a full thing where you can't see eyes. I think in a modern society, in Britain, as a citizen of Britain, it's perfectly acceptable if you're sitting down with a professional like a doctor or with your MP or with anybody else in a set of circumstances. You don't let people in with a motorbike helmet on or a mask from,
Forgive me, we do let people in with a mask. I mean, if you go to quote 2002, the world has moved on since then. We very much
let in with a mask?
Face masks are now... It's recognising there are circumstances where that is that. It's not really a valid argument. I know what you're arguing here, but I think we have moved on from that.
Okay, well, let's move on we've got time for one more question. This is from Cassie in Pimlico. In contrast to standing up to Israel, why is this government so scared of saying boo to a goose when it comes to China? Now, the Chinese state is seeking to build its largest embassy in Europe in London on the site of the Royal Mint Court next to the Tower of London. Reports in the Chinese state media claim British ministers have supported the plans to build this new mega embassy despite the official planning process not having been completed yet. Giles, let's start with you on this.
When we were in the Foreign Office, I had deep concerns about, so did the police, so did planning authorities, so did the local authority. We explained to the Chinese that although you don't understand that this system works where local people can make a decision about something, that is nonetheless the case. Their argument was this should be discussed between ministers, foreign ministers. We don't understand why local people have any involvement. We understood why in a communistic dictatorship you don't get that. Nonetheless, that is the case. I think it is very odd that the same design over which lots of people across the range of the state have some concerns has been presented once again, and that various departments, including the Home Office, the Foreign Office, have lent on Angela Rayner and said, we think you should push this through. It's a mistake.
Liz?
Well, of course, we should be careful with what we allow China to do when it comes into infrastructure as well. So I would be questioning this.
Admirably brief. Joe?
I don't really have much to add. I think, why would we?
Because we should explain. The point is, for those of you who are not familiar with the layout of London, this is right by the Tower of London. It's on the edge of the City of London. There are sensitive cables, I gather, that go under the site, and they could be tampered with. Who knows? I mean, that's the concern. Alan Mack.
Well, the proper processes should be followed. I think there are some suggestions that Angela Rayner has been lent on inappropriately. My colleague Kevin Holdenmaker is leading the charge on this. There are some very strong concerns around this, so the proper process should be followed thoroughly.
OK. Right, our fun question from James in Glasgow. Snoop Dogg, two words that I've never said together on this programme in 15 years, says he wants to open a burger van. This is from James. Did I say this is from James in Glasgow? He wants to open a burger van right here at the home of football, Celtic Park, saying he'd even like to serve the burgers himself. What's your speciality in the kitchen, and where or to whom would you like to serve it? Alan?
I make a good lasagna, and my favourite Scotsman is Sir Alex Ferguson. I've never met him, but I'm a lifelong Man U fan. He's ex-Rangers, by the way, James, so sorry about that.
You would be coming from Hampshire.
But very keen to meet him, and I'm sure we'd have a lot to say about how the club's doing since he left.
Right, one lasagna. Joe?
I am more of like a mascot in the kitchen. I kind of bring the vibes and support and the energy rather than whipping stuff up. So do you a cocktail and maybe an olive. So, get Dolly Parton round for it.
Don't push yourself. You literally don't cook at all.
I mean, I do, but I don't cook to the extent which I'd be like, you've got to try my, I'm more of a fun person in the kitchen.
Okay, well, the mind boggles. Giles?
I'm with Joe. I live with somebody who is a supremely good chef, and me cooking is like doing crayon drawings for Picasso. I hate it. So I'm just there as the vibe. Yeah. Having been in government, struggled very, very hard to get things done, and were warned, my Labour colleagues, that things would be more complicated than they thought, and now having them tell me, yes, it is more complicated than we thought, I would like to serve my banoffee pie in Downing Street as a slice of humble pie to the Prime Minister.
Liz?
My husband, Dewey, likes to do the cooking because then he gets to eat what he likes to eat. But if I do get to make it, I like to make fondue because when you think of all the food, the hours you put in to make for your food for your family, they usually eat it in 5 minutes. And fondue takes longer to eat.
I tell you what I do actually.
There we go.
Oh, we just thought of something.
I do a great omelette. I'll do you an omelette and a glass of wine.
Spanish omelette. I do like a Spanish omelette. Well, I'm not even allowed to cook in my house because the only meal I ever cooked for my partner was, I think, the first night we came around for dinner, and I cooked a Mexican casserole, by which I mean I made a casserole and put a Mexican oxo cube in it. It didn't go down particularly well. So in 30 years, I've never made another
Briefly, Ian, my wife's going to kill me. I made some food for myself last night. I thought it was really, really good. I described it to her. She's a great chef. And her first reaction was, sounds grim. And that's why I don't cook.
Well, thank you all very much indeed for coming on the show tonight. Tomorrow's panel, following the government spending review announcement, consists of the Conservative Shadow Business Minister, Dame Harriet Baldwin, Labour MP Rachel Blake, and the economists Liam Halligan and Duncan Weldon. So that's tomorrow's cross question, sorted for you tomorrow at 8. Coming up in the next hour, there's been a lot of talk over the past couple of days about kosher and halal meat, or food rather, and the RSPCA have put out a study saying that they think that both should be banned. Now, I think this is remarkably uncontroversial, but if you are Jewish, if you are Muslim, you probably disagree with me. And I want to really get to the bottom of this over the next hour. My view is very simple. I think it should be banned, just as it is in quite a few other European countries, because I believe in not being cruel to animals. And it is quite clear that the methods of slaughter for halal and kosher meat are cruel to animals. Discuss.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, authorities in Austria say they believe a man suspected of killing 10 people in a school shooting was a former pupil. The suspect also took his own life after the attack in Graz. Police Director Gerald Ordner explains what they know about him so far.
The perpetrator was a 21-year-old person from the Graz area.